Unit 8, Supply and Demand, Price Taking and Competitive Markets. Firms with market power can set their own price. Market outcomes are generally not Pareto efficient, as we saw in Unit 7. In reality, many firms are price takers. In this unit we see how does the behavior of price-taking firms differ from price-setting firms? Can competition improve market outcomes? Model of interactions between price-taking firms and customers. We look at perfect competition, a special case of the model. Competitive equilibrium. Key concepts. Consider a simple model of a market with many buyers and sellers. Think about the potential for trade in second-hand copies of a recommended textbook for a university economics course. Demand for the book comes from students who are about to begin the course, and they will differ in their willingness to pay, WTP, an indicator of how much a person values a good measured by the maximum amount he or she would pay to acquire a unit of the good. No one will pay more than the price of a new copy in the campus bookshop. Below that, students' WTP may depend on how hard they work, how important they think the book is, and on their available resources for buying books. Figure shows the demand curve. As in Unit 7, we line up all the customers in order of willingness to pay, highest first. The first student is willing to pay $20. The 20th $10, and so on. For any price P, the graph tells you how many students would be willing to buy. It is the number whose WTP is at or above P. Similarly, supply depends on the seller's willingness to accept, WTA, the reservation price of a potential seller who will be willing to sell a unit only for a price at least this high. The supply of second-hand books comes from students who have previously completed the course, who will differ in the amount they are willing to accept, that is, their reservation price, the lowest price at which someone is willing to sell a good. Keeping the good is the potential seller's reservation option. Supply curve shows total quantity that all firms together would produce at any given price, represents the willingness to accept WTA of sellers. Sellers may have different reservation prices. The first seller has a reservation price of $2 and will sell at any price above that. The 20th seller will accept $7 and the 40th seller's reservation price is $12. If you choose a particular price, say $10, the graph shows how many books would be supplied Q at that price. In this case, it is 32. The supply curve slopes upward. The higher the price, the more students will be willing to sell. Equilibrium price. At the equilibrium market clearing price, supply equals demand. Any other price is not a Nash equilibrium. Example, if price was above P star, then there would be excess supply, so some sellers could benefit from charging a lower price. So the price would tend to settle at an equilibrium, a state of a market in which there is no tendencies for the quantities bought and sold or the market price to change, unless there is some change in the underlying costs, preferences, or other determinants of the behavior of market actors. Assumes the products are identical, so buyers would be willing to buy from any seller. At the end of the 19th century, the economist Alfred Marshall introduced his model of supply and demand using a similar example to our case of second-hand books. Most English towns had a corn exchange, also known as a grain exchange, a building where farmers met with merchants to sell their grain. Marshall described how the supply curve of grain would be determined by the prices that farmers would be willing to accept, and the demand curve by the willingness to pay of merchants. Then he argued that, although the price may be tossed hither and thither like a shuttlecock in the higgling and bargaining of the market, it would never be very far from the particular price at which the quantity demanded by merchants was equal to the quantity the farmers would supply. Marshall called the price that equated supply and demand the equilibrium price. Price-taking firms cannot benefit from choosing a different price from the market price and cannot influence the market price. In the textbook market that we have described, individual students have to accept the prevailing equilibrium price in the market determined by the supply and demand curves. No one would trade with a student asking a higher price or offering a lower one because anyone could find an alternative seller or buyer with a better price. The participants in this market are price takers. We have seen examples where market participants do not behave as price takers. The producer of a differentiated product can set its own price because it has no close competitors. Notice, however, that although the sellers of differentiated products are price takers, the buyers in Unit 7 were price takers. In this unit, we study market equilibria where both buyers and sellers are price takers. Demand curve showing feasible set is completely flat. Individual firm can sell as much or as little as it wants at the market price. It maximizes profits when MC equals P, slope of isoprofit equals 0. Firm's supply curve equals MC curve. On both sides of the market, competition eliminates bargaining power. We will describe the equilibrium in such a market as a competitive equilibrium. A competitive market equilibrium is a Nash equilibrium because given what all other actors are doing, trading at the equilibrium price, no actor can do better than to continue what he or she is doing, also trading at the equilibrium price. The bakery is a price taker. The market price is P star equals 2.35 euros. If you choose a higher price, customers will go to other bakeries. Your feasible set of prices and quantities is the area below the horizontal line at P star. The point of highest profit in the feasible set is point A, where the 80 euro isoprofit curve is tangent to the feasible set. You should make 120 loaves per day and sell them at the market price 2.35 euros each. You will make 80 euros of profit per day in addition to normal profits. Firm chooses quantity, not price. Your profit maximizing quantity Q star equals 120 is found at the point where P star equals MC. The marginal cost of the 120th loaf is equal to the market price. If P star were to rise to 3.20 euros, you could reach a higher isoprofit curve. To maximize profit, you should produce 163 loaves per day. In each case, you choose the point on your marginal cost curve where MC equals P. So your marginal cost curve is your supply curve. Now assume there are 50 bakeries, all with the same cost functions. If the market price is 2.35 euros, each bakery will produce 120 loaves. At a price of 1.52 euros, they each supply 66 loaves and the market supply is 3,300. The market supply curve looks like the firm's supply curve, but the scale on the horizontal axis is different. Market supply curve shows the total amount produced by all firms at each price. If the bakeries had different cost functions, then at a price of 2.35 euros, some bakeries would produce more loaves than others, but we could still add them together to find market supply. Competitive equilibrium. All buyers and sellers are price takers. At the prevailing market price, supply equals demand. Figure shows that the equilibrium price is exactly 2 euros. At this price, the market clears. Consumers demand 5,000 loaves per day and firms supply 5,000 loaves per day. Competitive equilibrium characteristics. The consumer surplus. At the equilibrium price of $2 in the bread market, a consumer who is willing to pay 3.50 euros obtains a surplus of 1.50 euros. Total consumer surplus. The shaded area above 2 euros shows the total consumer surplus, the sum of all the buyer's gains from trade. The producer surplus. Remember from Unit 7 that the producer's surplus on a unit of output is the difference between the price at which it is sold and the marginal cost of producing it. The marginal cost of the 2000th loaf is 1.25 euros. Since it is sold for 2 euros, the producer obtains a surplus of 0.75 euros. Total producer surplus. The shaded area below 2 euros is the sum of the bakery's surpluses on every loaf that they produce. The whole shaded area shows the sum of all gains from trade in this market, known as the total surplus. All gains from trade are exploited in equilibrium. No deadweight loss. Equilibrium allocation is Pareto efficient, assuming participants are price takers, contracts are complete, transaction only affects buyers and sellers, no external costs. The competitive equilibrium allocation of bread has the property that the total surplus is maximized. Figure shows that the surplus would be smaller if fewer than 5,000 loaves were produced. There would be consumers without bread who would be willing to pay more than the cost of producing another loaf, so there would be unexploited gains from trade. The total gains from trade in the market would be lower. We say there would be a deadweight loss, a loss of total surplus relative to a Pareto efficient allocation, equal to the triangle-shaped area that lies between the demand and supply curves from the quantity less than 5,000 to the Pareto efficient quantity. Producers would be missing out on potential profits, and some consumers would be unable to obtain the bread they were willing to pay for. Competitive equilibrium caveats. Allocation may not be Pareto efficient if assumptions do not hold. Fairness. The distribution of total surplus depends on the elasticities of demand and supply. Share of total surplus inversely related to elasticity. If you draw another more elastic demand curve going through point A, you will see the share of consumer surplus will be lower than before. Hard to find price takers in real life. Factors that affect equilibrium. The city's bakeries start out at point A, producing 5,000 loaves and selling them for 2 euros each. The entire supply or demand curve can shift due to exogenous shocks, example, technological change, popularity. The market supply curve then shifts because of the fall in the bakery's marginal costs. The supply curve shifts down because at each level of output, the marginal cost and therefore the price at which they are willing to supply bread is lower. The supply curve has shifted down, but another way to think of this change in supply is to say that the supply curve has shifted to the right. Since costs have fallen, the amount that bakeries will supply at each price is greater, an increase in supply. The effect of the fall in marginal costs is an increase in market supply. At the original price, there is more bread than buyers want, excess supply. The bakeries would want to lower their prices. The new market equilibrium is at point B, where more bread is sold and the price is lower. The demand curve has not shifted, but the fall in price has led to an increase in the quantity of bread demanded along the demand curve. Buyers and sellers adjust their behavior so that the market clears. The supply curve can also shift due to market entry, exit. If existing firms are earning economic rents and costs of entry are not too high, other firms may enter the market. The entry of new firms is unlikely to be welcomed by the existing bakeries. Their costs have not changed, but the market price has fallen to 1.75 euros, so they must be making less profit than before. As we will see in Unit 11, the entry of new firms may eventually drive economic profits to zero, eliminating rents altogether. We can study the impact of taxes using demand-supply analysis. Throughout history, governments have used taxes to raise revenue. Taxes on suppliers/consumers shift the supply/demand curve because the price is higher at each quantity. After a tax is imposed on sellers, supply curve shifts up. New equilibrium price goes up to P1. Price received by sellers after paying tax is P2. Taxes lower total surplus. Consumer surplus is given by red shaded area. Producer surplus is given by purple area. Government revenue is given by green area. Dead weight lost to society or loss of total surplus is shown by the white triangle labeled DWL. We can study the impact of taxes using demand welfare effect of taxes. Fall in total surplus is positively related to elasticity of demand, because if demand is elastic in response to taxes and a higher price, quantity demanded will fall further away from the Pareto optimal quantity than if demand was inelastic. Tax incidence. Who bears the tax burden depends on relative elasticity of consumers and producers. The less elastic group bears more of the tax burden because in response to the imposition of the tax, if demand is less elastic, price will increase a lot from the current price and most of the tax will be paid by the consumer. If supply is less elastic than demand, then the new price will not be much higher than the current equilibrium price, but quantity will fall a lot, causing producers to pay most of the tax. Taxes can still raise welfare if governments use tax revenue to provide beneficial goods/services. Perfect competition. Definition. A perfectly competitive market has the following properties. The good or service being exchanged is homogeneous. Very large number of potential buyers and sellers. Buyers and sellers all act independently of one another. Price information is easily available to buyers and sellers. Characteristics of perfect competition. Law of one price. All transactions take place at a single price. At that price, the market clears. Supply equal demand. Buyers and sellers are all price takers. All potential gains from trade are realized. Perfect competition may not hold completely in reality, but can be a good approximation to actual firm behavior. Evidence of perfect competition. Economists have used two tests for competitive equilibrium. 1. Do all trades take place at the same price? 2. Are firms selling goods at a price equal to marginal cost? It is hard to find examples of perfect competition. Even when consumers can easily check the price of products, online shopping sites, prices of the same product differ. Fulton Fish Market study discussed in textbook shows that even within the same market, prices of the same fish product differed for different customer types. Now we can compare the outcomes for price setters, Unit 7, versus price takers, Unit 8. Price setters, monopoly. In equilibrium, MC is less than price. Dead weight losses occur, leading to Pareto inefficiency. Owners receive economic rents in both long and short run. Firms advertise their unique product. Firms invest in R&D, seek to prevent copying. Price takers, perfect competition. In equilibrium, MC equals price. No deadweight losses present. Can be Pareto efficient. No economic rents in the long run. There is little advertising expenditure and little incentive for innovation. Summary of unit. In this unit we learnt 1. Model of price-taking firms. Competitive equilibrium where demand equals supply. Firms maximize profits where MC equals price. Perfect competition is a special case. Comparison with price-setting firms. 2. Used model to show how equilibrium can change. Exogenous shocks to demand/supply or market entry. Effect of taxation on surplus.